Let's get some analysis. Dalia Fahmy joins us now from New Jersey. She is an associate professor of political science at the Long Island University, Brooklyn in New York. Dalia, thanks so much for coming in on the show. Now, many would argue that the repression, corruption, neglect by Mubarak created the conditions that we are seeing in Egypt today. Would you agree with that?
There's a bit more to it. The conditions under 30 years of reign, you have to remember that the population in 30 years doubled under Egypt, under President Mubarak's rule. There was no real investment in infrastructure, in education, in growth, in development. And so in his 30 years of rule, what you saw was the intersection tied to that with political and social repression of the 2011 revolution in Tahrir Square, which ultimately led to his toppling, but also created the conditions where today you have a military dictatorship in Egypt under President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. So in many ways, Mubarak did create the conditions of a country that is economically teetering, a country that was not able to sustain any development and growth, a country that did invest in education and infrastructure in the future, to the intersection where today the social and political and economic conditions are worse, and it's in many ways the landscape of President Mubarak that led to this critical juncture we're in today.
You already mentioned a little bit there, you were comparing Mubarak's era with Egypt today ruled by Sisi, but can you tell us more about that? So what exactly has changed now when you compare it to Mubarak's era?
So what Mubarak was able to do for 30 years was play a balancing act where he actually created a large police apparatus to balance against a very large military apparatus. And so it was a very large security apparatus that allowed to foster and grow inside of Egypt. What we see happening today is that there is a tension between the two, but essentially the military is what's in power. Now, the balancing act Mubarak was able to do was to allow for enough political opening, enough release of prisoners from prison, for example, enough political participation in the 1990s and 2000s where he would allow for a little bit of steam, if you will, to be released from the social and economic pressures that were accumulating in Egypt. But what we're seeing today is under extreme repression of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, there isn't the political landscape that is seemingly a little bit open. There isn't the social landscape. You have upwards of 20-some international journalists in prison. You have 60,000 political prisoners today. You have the growth of a prison industry. 23 new prisons have been built under President Sisi. And so not only do you see the lack of economic and social progress, you see more extreme repression. And what we're seeing is that the balancing act that Mubarak was able to play, even under authoritarianism, is not happening today. Now, it could be that the major difference also is that people came into the squares and streets in 2011, and so the fear barrier was broken. And so in order to quell the moment of protest, repression had to be increased, and that's what we're seeing today. But I think we need to take a step back and look at what ultimately happened today. Today, President Mubarak passed away, and in many ways, he had already been irrelevant for the past decade since the revolution. However, he was able to pass away in a beachfront property that had been paid for by Egyptian taxpayers for the past decade. This is also a president who was tried and convicted for the murder and not stopping the murders of protesters in Tahrir. He was tried and convicted for theft of the country's wealth. He was tried and convicted, him and his sons, who apparently their sentences were overturned yesterday. And in many ways, the injustices that people came into Tahrir Square for 10 years ago, just symbolically today, were erased when the person who was removed from office was allowed to die in a beachfront property paid for by Egyptian taxpayers.
Right, Dalia Fahmy, thanks so much for that insight for us here at TRT World.